Before I start reading background casually, I would like to invite you to bring the poem under discussion into conjunction with some of the other important autobiographical poems in Indian writing in English, and these include Our Casuarina Tree of Turudat, an introduction of Kamala Das, a letter of Domorais, The Looking Glass of Shiv K. Kumar, and Rough Passage of R. Parthasarathi. Rough Passage is a book. Rough Passage is an independent book, but it can also be read as one long poem rather than as a collection of short poems. A poet, rascal, clown was born. The poet starts the poem by referring to his own birth. He uses the third person instead of the first person in order to achieve an effect of detachment. He wants to subject himself and his life to dispassionate analysis and evaluation. A poet, rascal, clown was born. This is the identity of the speaker. The threefold identity, the triple identity of the speaker. The identity of the speaker has three principal facets: poet, rascal, clown. Please note that the term poet comes first because Nissim Ezekiel saw himself first and foremost as a poet. He may have been a bad husband, a bad father, a bad friend, even a bad man, but he would not have forgiven himself if he had been a bad poet. Poetry was something very dear to his heart. Nissim Ezekiel started writing poetry as a schoolboy and saw the facet of the poet as the most important part of his personal identity. This is how he sees himself: poet, rascal, clown. Three facets to his own identity. The most important facet being that of a poet almost at birth, a poet till death. Nissim Ezekiel used to say that he would forgive himself if he had failed in any area of life. And I think he failed in quite a few areas of life. And going by his poems, failure is a constant theme dealt with by his work. But he would never ever forgive himself if he failed as a poet, not in a worldly sense, not in the sense of winning awards and getting published, but in the sense of writing good poetry, writing fine poems. A poet, rascal, clown. Rascal. Rascal means mischievous person, cheeky person. In his childhood, in his early days, Nissim Ezekiel was a very mischievous person, was a very cheeky person, and also, I should add, a very lovable person. A poet, rascal, clown was born. Clown is someone who makes you laugh, is an entertainer, a buffoon. Nissim Ezekiel had a very strong sense of humor, and he never ever hesitated to make fun of himself in public. He was a very popular teacher. He taught in the University of Bombay. He worked in the Department of English of the University of Bombay. and he was easily the most popular teacher in the University of Bombay, or at least in the Department of English of the University of Bombay at that time. And one of the reasons for this, one of the secrets behind his success as a teacher, was his sparkling sense of humor. He used to say that the highest joke was the one in which the speaker himself became the butt of the joke. Poet, rascal, clown. This is how the speaker identifies himself, the self identification of the speaker. A poet, a rascal, a clown. Throughout his life, Nissim Ezekiel was a professional poet, was a dedicated poet, was a committed poet who was determined to write better and better poetry, finer and finer poetry. He was also, throughout his life, a rather naughty person, a rather mischievous person, with a strong sense of humor. He was capable of making people laugh. He was capable of making his audiences laugh. He could be at the drop of a hat extremely hilarious. A poet, rascal, clown was born. The frightened child who would not eat or sleep, a boy of meager bone. The impression that the stanza gives is that the speaker is a person who had psychological problems almost from birth, a frightened child. As a child, he was almost always overwhelmed by fear. In private conversation, Nissim Ezekiel used to say that he had a twin brother, and the twin brother was fear. The frightened child who would not eat or sleep, disturbed sleep, no deep sleep, no profound sleep, no proper eating habits. Many children are like that. They don't eat properly and they create headaches for their parents, especially their mothers. The frightened child who would not eat or sleep, a boy of meager bone. Bone is the solid tissue which forms part of the skeleton, the solid part inside the body which is part of the skeleton. Meager bone in the sense the speaker was a very thin child, an undernourished child, a boy of meager bone, a very thin boy. Take a look at this child, this boy. He doesn't eat properly, he doesn't sleep properly, he's frightened, he's thin. He never learned to fly a kite. His borrowed top did not spin, failed to spin. What is the impression that you get? The impression that you get is that the speaker did not have a very normal childhood. Other children learned to fly kites, but the speaker never learned to fly a kite. Other children had tops. The speaker did not have a top. He had only a borrowed top, and he did not know how to spin the top. The totality of the impression generated by the stanza is that the speaker had a rather disturbed childhood. He was frightened, he did not eat properly, he did not sleep properly, he did not engage himself in the activities in which other children engaged. He should have learned to fly a kite, but he did not. He should have had a top of his own, he never had. And the borrowed top did not spin, failed to spin, refused to spin. The picture of a child, the picture of a boy out of place in his own environment, at odds with his own environment. I think a number of reasons can be found for this situation. For one thing, Nissim Ezekiel was born into a Beni Israel family. The Beni Israel, literally sons of Israel or children of Israel, are a small Jewish community in coastal Maharashtra. They spoke Marathi as their mother tongue, but they were Jews. They were not Hindus, they were not Christians, they were not Muslims. The fact that they were Jews and they formed a very small minority, a tiny minority, and that the fact that they were starkly different from most of their neighbors in their religious identity, in their customs, in their history, probably created a sense of alienation in the sensitive person that was the poet, and created this sense of alienation right from the time he was a baby, right from the time he was a child, right from the time he was a boy. Another reason is that the Ezekiels were an upper middle class family. They were better off financially than most of their neighbors, and they found it rather difficult to relate with their neighbors who were mostly middle class or lower class. A third explanation is that because the poet's father insisted on the family using English exclusively at home, the children of the family, including Nissim Ezekiel, never gained proficiency in Marathi. Marathi was a mother tongue traditionally, but during Ezekiel's childhood, his father insisted on the use of English, on the exclusive use of English at home. And the fact remains that till the end of his life, Nissim Ezekiel could never speak Marathi properly. And it was with great difficulty that he interacted in Marathi with waiters in restaurants, with beggars on the streets of Bombay, now known as Mumbai, with shopkeepers and others who did not know English. A final explanation is that Nissim Ezekiel's parents deliberately tried to insulate the children, including Nissim Ezekiel, from society in general. As a person who has personally interacted with Nissim Ezekiel, I certainly have gained the impression that Nissim Ezekiel's parents, especially his father, tried to isolate the children from society, tried to insulate the children from society for reasons of their own, for reasons of his own. The children of the family were never allowed to mingle freely with the other children of the locality. And as a result, they were robbed of many of the experiences that were shared by the children, the other children of the locality, such as flying kites and spinning tops.